A dog and her puppies face a lonely death until fate steps in. Bella and her little ones were flung from a shiny black car, left to shiver on a forgotten road near the Pine Tree Station. Picture a mother's quiet panic, her silky fur caked with mud, her pups too small to understand their abandonment. A tired truck driver, a scared dog, and a kid with a big heart were about to rewrite what home really means. Get ready. This tale will tug at your chest. Before we start, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more stories of grit and grace. The morning fog draped the outskirts of the Pine Tree Station, a weathered stop just off Interstate 95, softening the world as the first rays of sunlight grazed the horizon. The air hung thick with damp earth and the faint tang of diesel drifting from the nearby highway. It was just another day for Jack Murphy, a 45-year-old truck driver who'd made the road his home for 2 decades. He'd pulled into the station for a break, his blue Peterbilt idling quietly as he rubbed weary brown eyes, etched with wrinkles from countless miles. His calloused hands rested on the wheel, steady as ever, his faithful rig a companion through endless journeys. The radio crackled softly, playing old country songs, his only company in the lonely early hours. Jack adjusted the rearview mirror, catching his reflection. A man with a trimmed gray beard, his face a blend of kindness and melancholy. Loneliness had shadowed him since losing his wife Amelia 5 years ago. That's when a small, frantic figure broke the quiet. A boy on a bicycle, pedaling hard up the side road that snaked past the station, waving with desperate urgency. At first, Jack figured it was just a kid in a jam, not uncommon around these parts. But as he leaned out the window, the boy's voice sliced through the mist. "Mister, help! There's a dog and her babies down there. They're hurt!" Something in that raw young cry seized Jack's heart, tugging him toward a moment he'd never imagined. The biting chill of the Massachusetts morning cut through his coat, but Jack barely noticed. Jimmy's voice broke through the quiet, small but insistent. "They're over here, mister." Then Jack heard it, a faint, pitiful sound beneath the hum of passing cars. Whimpers, tiny, desperate cries. The flashlight's beam caught a pair of wide, terrified eyes. It was Bella, though her name was still a mystery, a light-furred Shih Tzu, her once pristine coat now snarled with mud and fear. She shivered, not just from the cold, but from a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. 4 puppies pressed against her, their fragile bodies seeking shelter in her warmth. "My God," Jack whispered, a lump rising in his throat. The sight hit him like a fist. An entire family cast aside as if they were nothing, dumped on the edge of a roaring highway. Bella's gaze locked with his, her eyes brimming with anguish yet flickering with a fragile hope. Jack's light fell on a collar around her neck, finely crafted leather, etched with a faded H, now worn and fraying, a relic of a pampered life discarded without a second thought. The wind howled louder, carrying the distant wail of a siren as Jimmy looked up at Jack, his young face pleading for action. Jack glanced at his watch. The consignee was waiting, and he was already late, but the sight of Jimmy's wide, pleading eyes and the fragile family at his feet told him this was no ordinary delay. His flashlight remained focused on the small family, its beam cutting through the fog as if lighting not just the moment, but a road he hadn't known he'd take. A whisper from Amelia drifted through his mind. Sometimes God puts angels in disguise on our path. Staring at the shivering dogs and the boy who'd brought them to him, Jack wondered who the real angel was. Jimmy with his innocent courage, Bella with her quiet resilience, or perhaps himself standing at the edge of a life about to change. Jack wasn't one to falter, but his hands shook as he rummaged behind the seat, searching for anything useful. Amid blankets and road-worn supplies, he pulled out half a sandwich he'd saved and a bottle of water. 2 decades on the highway had taught him to be prepared, though he'd never pictured those scraps feeding a discarded family of dogs. He knelt beside Bella, his voice soft and steady. "Hey, little ones, you're safe now." Maggie, the warm-hearted attendant at the Pine Tree Station, Jack's regular stop on these endless runs, peered out from the window, her red hair a messy bun atop her head. Known for nursing strays back to health, she stepped outside, her curiosity piqued. "Jack Murphy, what troubles found you now?" she called, her voice teasing but kind. Something that'll break your heart, Maggie, Jack answered, offering Bella bits of sandwich. She hesitated, her eyes wary beneath the tangled fur, but hunger won out. Slowly she edged closer, letting Jack and Jimmy check the puppies huddled against her. Levi, the station mechanic, a burly figure with grease-stained hands and a heart bigger than his frame, ambled over, Jimmy trailing close behind him. "We need to call the police," Levi said, his voice gruff with indignation. "Dumping animals like this, it's a crime." Maggie nodded, her brow furrowing as she added, "This is the third abandonment I've heard about this week. Something's off around here." Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine, his gaze shifting to Jimmy, who clutched a puppy protectively. The unease deepened when Jack's eyes fell on a symbol on Bella's necklace, a stylized H, old but distinct. "I'll call Ellen from the shelter," Maggie said, already pulling out her phone. "She needs to hear about this." Levi, meanwhile, hauled over a cardboard box lined with threadbare towels. "Let's give him some warmth for now," he muttered, setting it down as Jimmy gently placed a puppy inside. Then came the first jolt of suspicion. A sleek black car crept by, its tinted windows glinting. The driver, hidden behind sunglasses despite the overcast sky, lingered too long before speeding off. "Did you see that?" Levi growled, his frown deepening. "That car circled back twice this morning." Maggie returned, her face tense with news from Ellen. "Ellen says they're full, but she'll make it work. She hinted at some investigation. Wouldn't say more over the phone." Jack glanced at his watch, his delivery ticking closer. But leaving now felt impossible. Bella had already come close enough to allow his touch, and the puppies, though still scared, were beginning to show curiosity. "You can't walk away from this, Jack," Maggie said, her voice soft but firm, as if she'd read the conflict in his eyes. "Not after Jimmy brought them to you?" Levi scratched his stubbled chin, squinting into the distance. "I've got a kennel out back. Can keep them safe till Ellen gets here. But this whole thing stinks worse than old oil." A faint cough interrupted them. The smallest puppy, cradled in Jimmy's arms, wheezed weakly. Maggie dropped to her knees beside him. "This one's in bad shape," she said, her tone urgent. "We need a vet, fast." It was then that Jack made his first pivotal choice, one that would reshape not just that foggy morning, but the rest of his life. "I'm calling the company," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Some deliveries can wait. Lives can't." Jimmy looked up at him, eyes shining with gratitude, as Bella rested her head against the boy's knee. The first hitch came when Ellen pulled into the Pine Tree station, not in the shelter's van as expected, but in her beat-up blue Camry. Her green eyes were shadowed with worry as she clutched a stack of papers. "We've got a bigger mess than I thought," Ellen said, spreading out photos of other abandoned dogs, all Shih Tzus, each wearing a collar with a faint, familiar H. She tapped Bella's worn leather strap, the etched H barely legible under dirt and time. Jack's gut twisted as a memory flickered. Weeks back, he'd overheard two suited men at a diner, griping about a Harrington brat dumping a dog that didn't fit the family image. The second snag hit with Ellen's next words. The Harringtons, old money out of Boston, had a Shih Tzu they spoiled rotten. Word is, she vanished after turning up pregnant. Now we're seeing strays like her all over New England. Maggie, who was caring for the puppies, noticed something disturbing. "Something's wrong with them, isn't there? Besides this sick little one," she hesitated as if choosing her words. The first attempted solution came when Levi suggested taking them to a nearby veterinary clinic. "I know Dr. Henry. He can look at them without charging much," he said. But when they rolled up to the vets, a crowd spilled out the door, folks clutching more abandoned Shih Tzus, each story echoing Bella's. Discarded pets from wealthy homes, left to fend for themselves. Jack's mind jolted back to a month ago, a snippet of chatter he'd caught at a roadside diner. Two men in crisp suits muttering about a Harrington girl furious over a mutt ruining her purebred. He dismissed it as petty gossip then, but now it gnawed at him. Dr. Henry crouched beside the puppies, his face grim after a quick check. "These aren't run-of-the-mill strays," he said. "They're too fragile, probably inbred from over-pampered stock. Someone ditched them when they didn't turn out perfect." He pointed to their delicate legs and shallow breathing. "They'll need extra care to pull through." The story becomes more complicated when a police car arrives at the clinic. Detective Paul stepped out, his stern face half hidden by a stack of files. "We're investigating the elite's pet breeding operations," he said, opening a file. "Your find ties into it. Evidence of a bigger mess." Jack watched Bella, her eyes still wary but fierce as she curled tighter around her puppies, a mother's instinct unbroken by betrayal. "How long does the little one have?" he asked, nodding at the wheezing pup in Jimmy's arms. "Days, maybe," Dr. Henry replied, his tone heavy. "There's a specialist in Boston who could help, but it's pricey." Maggie rested a hand on Jack's shoulder, her voice gentle. "You've done plenty, Jack. You don't have to upend your life for this." But Jack's gaze stayed fixed on Bella and her brood, Amelia's words echoing in his skull. "Angels in disguise." Detective Paul glanced at his buzzing phone. "Just got word more abandoned dogs turned up near Providence. Same fancy collars, same story." Jack pulled out his wallet, thumbing the faded photo of Amelia he always kept close. "She used to say destiny doesn't knock. It shows up on the roadside waiting." "How much is the complete treatment?" asked Jack, his voice firm despite the apprehension. The amount mentioned by the veterinarian represented a good portion of his savings, but something inside him had already made a decision. Rain started tapping the clinic roof, a soft rhythm underscoring the moment. Jack stood at a fork in the road, not just for Bella and her pups, but for the man he'd become. "Are you sure about this?" Maggie asked, her voice laced with worry. "That's a lot of money, Jack." He met Bella's gaze again. Those eyes, once clouded with fear, now glowed with a trust he couldn't turn his back on. "Some debts aren't settled with cash," he said softly, the ache of losing Amelia flaring in his chest. "Sometimes life demands payment in love." After 3 days at the specialized clinic in Boston, the weakest puppy, now called Lucky, took a significant turn for the worse. Dr. Samuel, a canine genetics specialist, called Jack for a serious conversation in his office. "What they did to these dogs is criminal," explained the doctor, showing tests that revealed concerning genetic alterations. Years of coddling and inbreeding from some rich fool's pet project left them too fragile to thrive. Jack had already poured nearly all his savings into their initial care. Back at the Pine Tree Station, Maggie and Levi were tag-teaming to watch the other puppies, with Jimmy pitching in after school. Bella stayed glued to Lucky's side, her nose pressed to his tiny frame, eating only when coaxed in the hospital room. "The complete treatment will cost triple what we imagined," said Dr. Samuel, his voice heavy with the news. "And even then, there's no promise he'll make it." Jack sank into the office chair, the weight of it all pressing down. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. His trucking company was losing patience with his absences. Then a crucial discovery changed everything. Detective Paul strode in, a sheaf of papers in hand. "We searched the Harrington family record," he said, spreading them out on the table. "They had pet insurance on Bella. Pricey stuff, still active." Tension spiked when they realized proving Bella's tie to the Harringtons wouldn't be easy. The faded H on her collar wasn't enough, and the family's lawyers were already stonewalling. "You need to see this," Maggie said, bursting into the clinic, breathless. She thrust her phone at Jack, showing screenshots from an old society blog. Bella, pristine and pampered, posing with a Harrington heiress. "Check the collar in the photo. It's the same H." Jack spent the night poring over the evidence with Detective Paul. The fight was taking shape. They found a clue, not a big breeding plan, but a mess left by rich folks in Boston. "It's not just the Harringtons," Paul said, pointing at a map. "People are finding spoiled pets dumped in 3 states, all with the same fancy collars and the same excuse: they didn't look right." Dr. Samuel's assistant, who'd been checking the puppies, jumped in with big news. Their problems, bad lungs, weak bones, come from too much inbreeding to make them pretty. Time was running out. Lucky needed urgent surgery, and the other puppies were beginning to show signs of similar problems. Jack looked at his empty wallet, at the phone full of unanswered messages from his boss, at Bella's hopeful eyes. "I can't let them die," said Jack, his voice choked. "Not after all this." Maggie burst in again, eyes wide. Her social media post about the case had gone viral, People nationwide are sharing stories of fancy dogs abandoned like trash. It's a whole ugly picture. We're building a case, Paul said, his jaw tight. But we need these dogs alive. They're our living proof. Jack gazed out the hospital window, the city buzzing below. Somewhere out there, the Harringtons sat cushioned by wealth, likely shrugging off their mess. Dr. Samuel returned with new tests. There's something different in their DNA, he said, pointing to a sequence on the monitor. Something that could only have been done in a specific laboratory. How much time do we have? Asked Jack, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. For lucky, 48 hours at most, answered the doctor. To prove their origin and activate the insurance, even less. Maggie held Jack's hand. You're not alone in this, she said. We're all going to help. Levi arrived, bringing more allies. Other truckers who had known Jack for years, all willing to contribute. Family is family, said one of them, even if they have four paws. Night was falling over Boston as Jack stroked Bella, who had finally fallen asleep beside Lucky. We're going to make it, he whispered, more to himself than to the dogs. There has to be a way. The showdown kicked off on a drenched Thursday morning. Rain streaked the glass walls of the Boston Vet Clinic, mirroring the luxury sedans crowding the lot. Detective Paul had strong-armed an emergency sit-down, dragging the Harringtons people to the table after weeks of dodged summons. Jack stood at the meeting room window, raindrops blurring his reflection. In recent weeks, he'd lost weight and sleep, but his eyes maintained a fierce determination that Maggie said was inspiring. They're here, Levi called from the doorway, nodding toward the entrance. 3 suits and a woman dripping in pearls. Bet her necklace costs more than my truck. Evelyn Harrington, matriarch of the family, swept in like she owned the place. Tall, poised, gray hair swept into an elegant twist, a diamond brooch glinting at her collar. Her polished smile faltered at the sight of the packed room. Besides Jack, Maggie, and Levi, there were representatives from animal protection groups, other veterinarians, and 2 pro bono legal teams. You can't pin this on us, Evelyn sniffed, her tone icy with disdain. Dogs get dumped all the time. Sad, but not our problem. Jack's fists tightened, but Dr. Samuel stepped up, calm as steel. He flicked on a projector, flashing images across the wall. Vet reports, X-rays, blood work. These dogs bear the scars of obsessive inbreeding, he said, pointing to brittle bone scans and lung charts. That's the hallmark of the purebred dogs of the upper class. Your family's breeding records fit that pattern, Mrs. Harrington. The tide turned when Maggie, hands shaky but voice steady, rose to share her find. This came in anonymously last night, she said, plugging her laptop into the projector. Grainy home footage flickered on screen. Bella, pregnant and pristine, lounging in a lavish Harrington estate, her collar's H gleaming. The video cut to a later clip. Her being shoved into a car by a gloved hand, the same car speeding off as her cries echoed. Recognize this, Mrs. Harrington? Detective Paul asked, sliding Bella's worn collar across the table. His quiet tone edged with steel. We've got 14 more just like it, all dumped in the last 2 months. Your family's signature. Jack's stare bore into Evelyn Harrington. Beyond the window, Lucky clung to life in the ICU, machines beeping a fragile rhythm. The room held its breath when her lawyers called for a recess, retreating with clipped steps. Maggie gripped Jack's trembling hand, his anger a coiled spring. They'll push a settlement, Paul muttered, raking a hand through his gray hair. But we need more than money. We need to stop them from doing this again. That's when Dr. Samuel, who had spent the night analyzing new data, made an announcement that changed everything. This isn't just neglect, it's reckless endangerment. The Harringtons' obsession with creating perfect dogs pushed these dogs to their limits. He flashed a report. Generations of vanity breeding, documented in their own kennel logs, had left the animals sick. Evelyn, back with her lawyers, faltered, her cheeks flushed, a crack in her icy facade. You don't get it, she snapped, brushing off her team's frantic hushing. We were preserving perfection, a flawless Shih Tzu, a status symbol worth every penny. Worth their pain? Jack cut in, his voice thick with disgust. He stood, broad shoulders squared from years on the road. You tossed them out like garbage when your perfection broke. Innocent lives traded for your ego. The standoff began to crack when the Harringtons' lawyers, sensing the walls closing in, shifted tactics. They dangled a deal, full coverage of medical costs plus a $1 million fund for other abandoned pets. Not enough, declared Detective Paul, opening a folder full of documents. We want complete records, all buyers, all dogs, all laboratories involved. Jack returned to the intensive care room window. Bella lay inside, permitted by the staff to curl beside Lucky. Even frail and frightened, she never strayed from her pups. She knows love, loyalty, family, stuff your money can't touch. The air grew thick as shouts erupted outside. Reporters swarmed, tipped off by Maggie's viral post, joined by a growing throng of animal advocates and furious locals pacing the clinic's front. The victory was only the beginning. In the next week, the files they took showed a sad truth. Not secret labs, but a bunch of rich families all over the Northeast tossing out pets when they weren't perfect anymore. Did you expect this? Maggie asked Jack a few days later, as they watched Bella relax in the clinic's calm. Her puppies, now healthier, snuggling close. Jack smiled, thinking about how his life had changed. Amelia always said our greatest acts of love start with small bursts of courage, he murmured, pulling his wallet from his pocket. He brushed a thumb over her faded photo, her eyes still bright in memory. I think she'd be proud. The legal gears would keep grinding, but the first fight was won. The Harringtons' names were brought to light, their dog breeding diaries exposed. A fund was set up to heal the discarded pets, and whispers of tougher laws stirred in the air. What are you going to do now? Asked Levi, who had become a close friend throughout the journey. They were all gathered in the clinic's outdoor area, celebrating Lucky's recovery with an improvised small barbecue. Jack's gaze settled on Bella and her pups, safe and thriving. The answer glowed in his chest long before he spoke it. Maybe since that foggy dawn when Jimmy's voice pulled him from his car. 6 months had slipped by since that fateful morning on the highway. The Pine Tree Station buzzed that bright Saturday, strung with banners and balloons. Levi had thrown a party for Bella's puppies, now strutting their stuff after basic obedience training. Jack watched the scene with a smile, leaning against his new truck. Smaller than before, but perfect for his new regional routes that allowed him to return home every night. Lucky, now a healthy and playful puppy, never left his heels. Who would have thought that little fighter would become the most mischievous? Commented Levi, serving drinks to guests. The mechanic had transformed part of his garage into a small temporary shelter for rescued animals. The transformation wasn't just the dogs. Maggie's station was now known as a support point for abandoned animals, with a network of volunteers always alert. The Harrington case had awakened the community to a problem that always existed, but many preferred to ignore. Bella sprawled in the sun, her eyes half closed as she watched her puppies tumble with kids who'd flocked to the party. Her fur, once matted with fear, now gleamed like silk. The battered old collar was gone, swapped for a sky blue one with a golden tag engraved Murphy family. Fate's got a funny way of working, Jack said, his gaze soft on his new crew. I needed a fresh start, and I got 5 reasons to keep going. The Harrington case had sparked a reckoning. New pet welfare rules were on the table. Evelyn faced charges, and the fund they'd forced out of her kept saving cast-off animals nationwide. Amelia nailed it, Jack whispered, mostly to himself. Angels show up where you least expect them. He could feel her smile, proud of the odd little family he'd stitched together. The party hummed on till dusk, folks drifting in and out, some with their own rescued mutts, others asking about adoption. Bella and her pups had lit a spark, a beacon of grit and renewal. With the fund and donations pouring in from Maggie's viral post, Jack built Amelia's Haven step by step. His rescue haven now a bustling lifeline for strays. His once silent home thrummed with chaos and warmth. Lucky claimed a spot on his bed each night, as if double-checking his hero hadn't vanished. You know, Maggie said, sidling up with a steaming coffee, that morning, Jimmy waved you down. It rewrote us all. Jack nodded, the sunset splashing orange across the sky. The highway stretched out beyond, the same ribbon where it all kicked off, whispering that the best turns are the ones you never map. Which of Bella's puppies touched your heart the most during the story? Write in the comments. We're on an exciting journey to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything. Please like, share, and subscribe to be part of this tale.